We can, oh, I'm on. Yeah, oh, okay. Phew. Wow, that caught me off guard. It's a good thing I wasn't in a foul mood. My wife would have to tell us, I'm checking for the microphone back. My wife would have to tell you if I'm ever in a foul mood. I don't feel a difference in my moods. They're all just Tim being Tim. Well, before we get started, next week we have class, and we'll put it up. I'm going to get, from the communications people, a definitive pathway to finding these videos online. Because I can't find them, and so it's like, you don't have anything to do with that, no. I know, and what I don't want to be is that overbearing old man who's also still on staff for some reason, who tells the communication people what they're supposed to do. So I'm going to just ask them to give me the patterns that we take to find all of the things, so that I'll send it out to everybody so that you can find them. Because they're there, but somewhere. They're all on the YouTube channel? They're all on the Grace YouTube channel? Okay, see, I just need to send that out, because
I mean, there's other stuff there too, but you're definitely there. Don't feel left out.
I don't feel left out. It's just like people keep writing to me and saying, how do I find you, and how do I get to watch you live? Yeah. And so we'll take care of that. Let me think if there's anything. We come back on the 11th of January. I just figured out, I don't know if you like me preaching, but Barry's taking a sabbatical this summer. So guess what?
If we're here, we'd probably like you preaching.
Yeah, I understand. Thank you. I guess that's right. I don't know. So, some people say they would rather that I taught when I preach, and I'm thinking, what do I do when I preach? It is different, but it has to be different. But yeah, I did something yesterday that they filmed, and I spent a lot of time preparing, and when I got there, I could have done it without preparing, because they only wanted like 2 sentences from me. It was fine. It's fine, but I just was over-prepared. So let me think. I don't have anything else to tell you. No, there's no. This is probably the least gossip time I've ever had while I've been working at Grace in all my years. It's like in the past there was always something to tell you, but there's nothing to tell you. So anyway, yeah. What? Oh, I'm never going to do another bike ride sermon. Here's the deal. You do that one time. And the reason is because if you do it a second time, it's like it's like beating a dead horse, It's like, well, it worked one time. And the other thing is that I don't want people going, wow, he was so young when he did the first one. Look at him. I don't want that. Or he's so fat now compared to when, or something. I don't need that. But no, I'll never do that again. That really caught everybody off guard, I think. Particularly the team that had to do it. So it was fine. We had a blast, but it was all done in one take. I just rode my bike and preached. Yeah, so. I think it's on the Grace channel, the Grace website. I don't know if it's on the YouTube channel. I don't know. Guys, I do not watch myself. I don't. It's like if I was a football player and I had to spend the whole next week watching film of myself, I would not be happy. Can you imagine? I was always worried that when I first came that Dave was going to bring me in his office and play the sermon and like go through each line and my hand gestures and all that stuff. He never paid any. I don't even know they ever came to church when I was preaching. So that's just kidding. Just kidding. Just kidding. Okay, let me, we only got, what, 4 verses last week? I am prepared to finish this section through verse 13, starting in verse 5. I don't know how far we'll get. I will say this, that if we're going to stop for 4 weeks, it'd be nice to stop at an ending point that makes sense in the process here, and at the end of this section. So I'm not trying to finish it tonight, but if we do, then we'll go ahead. It's just that we go into these verses through 9:13, I think it is, are a separate story, and then things really change when we get to the next hunk. And so, I mean, I don't mind having us in the beginning of a new hunk, but I'd rather not if we don't. But we'll just see where we get. Let me pray for us and we'll get going. Lord, I am thankful for your love for us, as reminded in so many ways so many ways in the things that I've been fortunate to read and study about you and your word over the last weeks, and even today. I thank you for your love for us. My prayer, Lord, is that I will be only an instrument of your truth and of your love for all mankind, and your Son's, I would say, his amazing power and authority and glory. May we see that and also see his heart for each one of us in what we talk about tonight. I pray in Jesus' name. Amen. Alrighty, I'm going to read the whole thing, start with verse 1, but we're going to start talking about things in verse 5, but I'll just read it. 6 days later, Jesus took Peter, James, and John and led them up a high mountain to be alone. As the men watched, Jesus' appearance was transformed, and his clothes became dazzling white, far whiter than any earthly bleach could ever make them. Then Elijah and Moses appeared and began talking with Jesus. Okay, here's where we're going to start then. Peter exclaimed, "Rabbi, it's wonderful for us to be here. Let's make 3 shelters as memorials, one for you, one for Moses, and one for Elijah." He said this because he didn't really know what else to say, for they were all terrified. Then a cloud overshadowed them, and a voice from the cloud said, "This is my dearly loved son. Listen to him." Suddenly, when they looked around, Moses and Elijah were gone, and they saw only Jesus with them. As they went back down the mountain, he told them not to tell anyone what they had seen until the Son of Man had risen from the dead. So they kept it to himself, but they often asked each other what he meant by rising from the dead. Then they asked him, "Why do the teachers of the religious law insist that Elijah must return before the Messiah comes?" Jesus responded, "Elijah is indeed coming first to get everything ready. Yet why do the scriptures say that the Son of Man must suffer greatly and be treated with utter contempt? But I tell you, Elijah has already come, and they chose to abuse him just as the scriptures predicted." Okay, verse 5 in the Greek starts out really oddly. It starts out like this. It starts out, "And answering Peter said." And answering Peter said. Now, the weird part about that is that there has been no indication whatsoever that anybody asked Peter a question. I don't know why the Greek says that. And I think that the NLT and just about every other translation, I could just look really quickly at. I have 2 other. No, there. Okay, this one has "and answering." Yeah, because the Greek is really "and answering." I'm saying he exclaimed. I think that's a really inappropriate thing. If we think about the moment, when we think about what has been happening up to this point, when they see these men there with them and Jesus is all, I mean, it's saying he exclaimed, because I can't imagine that he said anything less than a grand acclamation of something. Like he's just worked up when he says this. Again, it's clear that though they've not been introduced, it's clear that they know who these two guys are. Again, how they knew, I don't know. And again, I'll say, like I've said before, I cannot find anyone who attempts to answer that question. It's just clear, it's known to them. Anyway, the first thing out of Peter's mouth is rabbi. And I just have to say, there's a bunch of stuff to say about the fact that he calls him rabbi. And what I'm about to do is probably going to change your thinking about the word. This word was not generally used in the Aramaic, because it's an Aramaic word, in just general terms of a teacher. The Rabboni or rabbi word, it meant literally in their language, it meant my great one or my master. It is not a word that meant teacher. And we're told that that's what it meant. It's not used in any broad sense as teacher until the 2nd century AD. Now, the word existed. I don't know if you've noticed this, but in the other tellings, one of the Gospels, Peter does not say rabbi, he says Lord. And in the other one, he says master. I think he said rabbi. And here's the reason, because I think he was flustered and he used a word that they would not normally have used to refer to Jesus. Now, there's one amazing aspect about this, and as you follow me on this, that when people say that this whole story was made up by the early church, because they do. They say, oh, this is just a made-up story by the early church that they stuck back into their stories that they told about Jesus to bring Jesus to a higher level. To say there was a time that he showed his glory to us, but it didn't really happen, and the early churches made it up. Because it is sort of hard to believe, right? I mean, it's a mysterious story. The early church never referred to Jesus as rabbi. And they never would have put rabbi in Peter's mouth if they were making up a story to make Jesus look bigger, because rabbi has nothing to do with what he sees right then. If it wasn't a mistake on his part to say rabbi, it just came out of his mouth, then I don't know what to say about it. I think he really said it, and he felt stupid about it. And every time he told this story, he says, can you imagine? I was so scared that I called Jesus rabbi. Does this make sense? There's an apologetic for the reality of the text not having been changed by leaving it rabbi. Now, I know I'm going on and on about this, but these are the little things that the scholars, that scholars who don't want to believe that the text is telling us the truth, when they're trying to say that this faith in Jesus is just something that communities in the ancient past created in order to answer some questions they had in their own lives or something like that. You get this all the time. I don't know if any of you read Boltmann. Do any of you read Boltmann? I've had to. He was like the man in the early part of the last century, and all he does is just deny that anything's real. Or you've heard of the Jesus Project, where they say that they get together and they say whether they think Jesus actually said those things and stuff like that. Well, they would. This is one of those places where there's no chance that the early church would have called Jesus a rabbi, because what did they refer to him in the early church? They called him Jesus the Christ. They called him Lord. They called him the Son of God. They referred to him that way. Look at the early church writings. They do not call Jesus the famous rabbi from Galilee. Anyway, him yelling out, "Rabbi, it's wonderful for us to be here." Now, a lot of people, I've heard this preached so many times. Scholars do not say this. I'm not a scholar, but I'm not going to say that he said this because he was such a bonehead. That's what they say. This proves that Peter was just a bonehead. He's just a big dude with, because he's a rock, and he's just no brains, he's all brawn and all that, and he just says something stupid. No, I can't even imagine what I'd have said if I'd have been there. He says, "Rabbi, it's good, or it's wonderful for us to be here." Now, I think the reason that he said that was because he was all excited about the fact that he could go back down the mountain and tell everybody what he'd seen. It's really good that we're here, because if you'd have come up here by yourself, nobody would have been able to tell anybody what we saw, what was happening. So it's good for us to be here. One thing is for certain, Jesus did not need Peter to tell him that it was good for them to be there. I don't know what Jesus' foreknowledge of exact events were. I don't know. That's a question I want to ask him if I ever get an opportunity to just have a conversation. I just want to say, "Hey, Jesus, what did you know and what didn't you know?" If he knew what was about to happen, though there's some indication in the way he talks about things that he did know that something was about to happen, and he knew that it was good for them to be there. He knew that it was good for them to be there, and he took them with him. But anyway, this is just Peter saying something, and then he says something even more, I would say, just, what do they call that, where things go like this? What do they call it? A slide brain language, where it hits your brain and then just slides out your mouth. He says, "It's wonderful for us to be here. Let's make 3 shelters." The word there is actually the word tent, for tent. But we also have to remember that the word for tent, there it is. It's skinos. You see it in there? And it says, it goes like it's this kai, I can't see, poiasomen, is that what it is? Trace kai, yeah, poiasomen, that it's, let's make 3 tents. The word for the tabernacle in the Septuagint is the same word, because the tabernacle was a tent. And there's a lot of things about that I could talk about, but we don't need to talk about this. Now, just know that it could, so sometimes they say 3 tabernacles. People translated that. It's also the word that was used for the booths that they made in the Festival of Booths. And there's a festival where what they would do is, and I have something personal to say about this, but they would take sticks and branches and they would build in the back. They didn't have backyards, but they would build. There we go. There's one. That's a modern one. Oh, they've actually got a tent with branches on it. And they live out under those for 7 days and celebrate the festival. The festival's 7 days. And that's what they did. They'd make these things, and they had the same name as the tabernacle and the same name as a tent. And what they were doing was they were showing honor to their forefathers and how they lived in the wilderness back in the day, and this was a festival to celebrate that time. I have a great Jewish friend here in town, and the last time I went to his house, guess what he had in his backyard? He didn't have a tent. He had a thing of a whole bunch of branches and sticks and stuff, and it was this big thing out there, and I knew exactly what was going on, but I didn't want to say anything much about it. But he said, and of course he said, "Did you notice our booth in the backyard?" It's like that. But yeah, that's what it is. Now, some people think that Peter said this because he was saying we need to make a memorial to the three of you so people will remember this moment. I don't think that's the case, because the language that he uses here is, he could have used a word that spoke of building something like out of stone or something that was permanent. He used a word that means something that you put up for a short period of time. I think what he was thinking was, well, some people say that he was saying, let's build these things because it gets hot up here in the afternoon and you need to be in the shade. You can each have your own little booth, but what I was thinking he was thinking was that we're going to be up here a while, and you guys need a place to sleep and rest and that kind of, so let's make 3 of these as a way for people, as a way to show honor to you. I don't know. But he says, we'll build one for Moses and one for you and one for Elijah. We all know that part of the story. The part that is really true, though, is it says, he said this because he really didn't know what else to say. Honestly, guys, I don't know that I'd have known what to say. I don't know that I will know what to say when I see Jesus for the first time as he really is. This is a hint of what's the old song, a foretaste of glory divine? That's from some song I used to sing as a kid. I don't know, does anybody remember that line from the, oh, what a foretaste of glory divine. This is my story, this is my song. Yeah, a foretaste of, that's exactly what we're seeing in this story. And what little Peter saw, or was seeing, of the whole, made him incapable of saying anything that made much sense. He was just trying to get, and then it says, and they were all terrified. That's the right word. That word means utterly, exceedingly afraid. In Matthew, they end up on their faces on the ground. Now that, it says in Matthew that it happens when the cloud comes in a minute, but the only other time that the word that gives us, is that what it's oh yes, it's right there. That word ekphoboi. Now phoboi means to be afraid. Ek is a prefix which heightens its intensity. To say there, and the only other time that word is used in the New Testament at all is when in Hebrews it is talking about Moses and how afraid he was when it was time for him to go up onto the mountaintop and get the word from God. And so the writer, this Mark, uses the same word to describe what Moses felt when he went to a mountaintop and was in the presence of the glory of God. Does this make sense? It's like they're connected there linguistically. That's how afraid he was. I just keep thinking about this. this is just a little bit off track, but I'm preaching at Fisher's this weekend. And it's a Christmas sermon. And I am so overwhelmed by this passage where we get a glimpse of the true nature of Jesus sitting next to the baby in the manger. Because it's the same guy. And the truth is that what terrified them, what overwhelmed them, was only hidden beneath the shell of that baby. He was still capable of being all that he is at any moment. And yet, the world has no idea. It has no idea. I keep thinking about it. Honestly, I'm thankful that I get to preach about it, because it's not a story we should ever lose. I think I said in one of my last sermons that Jesus is not our buddy. He's just not. He just makes it possible for us to generally be in his presence. Because if he didn't give it to us in a way that we as humans can take it, we would be terrified. Terrified. Anyway. So Peter has said this. We can go to the next verse. We're moving right along here. Moving right along. It says, okay, now then it says a cloud overshadowed them. And let's talk a minute about this cloud. There's some question among the scholars in terms of what the Greek word means there that gives us overshadowed. And there it is. It's the big one in dark print. It's episkiazousa. Episkiazousa. And the argument is whether or not it just hovered over them or whether it covered them completely. Okay? So we got this one word that they've argued over. And so it's like, can I just ask you scholars, why are you wasting our time with this? If the cloud hovered over them, because they tend to translate it, overshadowed them, so that it's like we kind of cover the whole thing with one other word, but it doesn't really matter. And then they argue about this. Did it just cover Jesus and the two prophets? Or did it just cover the disciples? Or did it cover all of them? Can I just say, I don't care, okay? The cloud in the Old Testament is always a picture of the presence of God in the daytime. The cloud by day. Clouds in the ancient world were always a symbol of hope. And here's why. Because it only rained in about half the year, and half of the year the sun shined down brightly every day, all day, and you never had any rain. You had a sunny season, and then you had a rainy season. And the rainy season made it possible for you to have enough food to live through the sunny season. And when the clouds started to show up on the horizon, it meant it was going to rain. And so clouds are always a sign of great hope in the ancient world, and it makes perfect sense to me that the God of the universe would decide to display himself in a manner that everybody in the ancient world thought of as a sign of what? Hope. See that? God is using something that man thinks about when he sees the world as a means to bring a deeper meaning to us. Is God a cloud? No. But he takes the form of a cloud almost always because he uses it as a time to have his presence known. He uses it to have his presence known, okay? So a cloud comes. This is what? A sign of hope. And it covers them over. Again, just like in the giving of the law, we hear a voice. And we have voices from the clouds, or we have voices that speak of God. He speaks, and it's always something that we better listen to. Something we listen to. This is the way. And the other thing is, now when the Israelites first heard the voice of God from the mountaintop, do you remember what their response was? They said to Moses, "Why don't you just go up there and talk to him and then come back and tell us what he said? Because he's scaring us. We're afraid he's going to kill us," kind of thing. Now, we find that a bit funny, but you know what? If I was in Colorado Springs and a huge cloud with fire around it and lightning and stuff came over Pikes Peak, and then everybody in Colorado Springs heard a huge voice telling us that we better do this and we better do this and we better do this, it probably would put a bit of fear into me. Well, this voice says, and this is really important. He says, "This is my dearly loved son." It's agapato, I think, beloved. For that voice to make a statement about who Jesus is, yeah. What is it? It's agapate, agapatos. Yeah, I was right, agapatos. Yeah. This is the Son of me, the beloved. That's the way it was written out in there. Okay, first off, anybody who's the son of somebody else, the son of some father always represents the father in the ancient world. A son is the same as the father being there. The son speaks on behalf of the father. This is the way their world worked. The authority of the father was immediately passed on to a son. This is why when Jesus does the parable stuff, and he says that that the master sends servants, but he finally sent his son, it's as if he sent himself. And in fact, the way that you were supposed to approach things, that if a messenger was the son of someone else, you were to treat that son you were supposed to treat the messenger in the same way, but the son, you were to treat them for certain in the same way as if the father showed up. And in royal circles, this was absolutely true. For God to say, "This is my son," says it's the same thing. Who you are seeing and talking to is the same thing as if you're talking to me. This is a powerful statement on God's part to the group of them. Now, who is he talking to? He is only talking to the disciples. He's giving them a message. Now, Jesus is referred to himself not as the Son of God, but he is referred to himself as the Son of Man. But he has done something that nobody else has ever done, and he's referred to God as what? His Father. He speaks of him in the possessive. So he's made statements that are, in their world, they are, what's the right word? Not scandalous, but what's the word? I just lost a word. I was coming right out of my mouth. What is it when you sacrilegious? You don't ever call God your father. You know, we say it all the time, but they wouldn't have said it. You'd say our Father, not mine, our Father. Anyway, he says, "This is my son." So now we've got this personal thing going. God himself has made a claim of what? Of owning, of having possessiveness of Jesus. And then he says, "Listen to him." I think that's akua how to. It's something like that. It's 2 words. It's in the imperative. Akute how to. That's not bad. I didn't do too badly, did I? Just from memory. Yeah, so. That's okay. There it is. Akute how to. What this means, it's a common phrase throughout the Septuagint, which is the Greek version of the Old Testament. And they use it whenever God wants to say, you listen and you obey. You listen and you obey. It's a very strong statement that is common for prophetic language and God to say in the Old Testament. And then God shows up here at this moment, and he's got the disciples, and they're covered by a cloud, and they're scared to death, and his message to them is, listen to him. He's my son, and by the way, that word that's beloved, it is like, it's one thing to say it's his son and he loves him. It's another to say this is an ongoing, deep affection. So this is a tender statement. God is telling Jesus in the moment that he really loves him. And then he says to the disciples, did you hear what I just said to him? Now you listen to him and you better do what he says. Now I'm just saying, that is an order from God I never want to hear. I never want God to have to say to me, do you know who we're talking about here? We're talking about my son, and I love him more than anything. You better listen to him, and you better do what he says. You see what I mean? This is strong stuff. Now, why would God have to say this? The reason that God had to say this was just 6 days ago, Peter said to Jesus, I'm hearing what you're saying, and I understand what you're saying, but I think you're off your wick here, and you're wrong, Jesus, and it's not going to happen, and so just would you stop talking about it? They weren't listening to him. They weren't listening to him. And God just wanted to back the bus up a little bit and remind them who you're dealing with here. He's my son. I love him. And what he says, you need to not just listen, but do what he says. Do what he says. That's strong. Like I said, I don't want that to happen to me. Though he could probably say it to me every day of my life. Yeah, every day. We doing okay? We doing okay? The next word, suddenly, is a really strong word. It means an event that comes up. It's an event that comes up and nobody expects it at all. It's just like boom. Boom. Now, in Matthew, we find out that when the cloud came, the disciples had fallen on their faces in fear, and they were down. And it says that Jesus came over to them, and he put his hand on them, and he said the grand heavenly greeting, fear not, which is what all angels begin their conversations with. You know, it's like, I'm sure I've told this class this, that I think I've only been with an angel one time, and he didn't say fear not to me. He didn't say that. And I always wondered if he was really an angel or not, because every time the angels show up otherwise, they say fear not, or they go, do you know who I am? That's about the only 2 things they ever say as introductions. But he says to the disciples, fear not. And it's a tender moment of Jesus putting his hand on their shoulders. And then they realize this, but it says, suddenly, when they looked around, they wake up. Elijah and Moses are gone. Where did they go? I do not know. I don't know. But they are apparently in a state where either God is manipulating something. I mean, it is possible that when the cloud lifted, he took them with him. I don't know. I'm just glad no junior hires ask me that question when I go, because I do this frequently. I go to the high school and junior high, and they just, any question, kids, and nobody ever goes, what happened to Elijah and Moses when the cloud lifted? They don't ask me that. They ask me, is my dog going to go to heaven? That's what they ask me, so that's sweet, but unfortunately my answer isn't helpful. But that's neither here nor there. They go, they're gone. And they saw only Jesus with them. The Greek is odd there because it actually is a double negative. It says like no one, not anyone, or something to that effect. In Greek, unlike English, a double negative does not negate the negative. Does that make sense? Like it intensifies the negative. And this is an important place to have two negatives against each other, to intensify their aloneness, because they were with whom just a moment ago. Now think about this. Just a moment ago, they were with Moses and Elijah and Jesus in a glowing state of glory and God himself. That's who they were with. I'd say that's a pretty austere gathering. And then suddenly like that, they're gone and it's just back to normal and they're just with Jesus. And Jesus is apparently, he's wearing a dark, normal, shabby robe. His face looks regular. He's just Jesus. And everything's just the way it was, just when they were walking up and they're by themselves. Now, I think that would have been equally scary. It's like, what just happened? What just happened? So we don't know how long they talked. We don't know how long they were there. We just know that they were there. And Mark is not very big on details. He never has been, and he's just not going into a lot of details. It's just they were gone. This whole story is, when we get to the life of Jesus, the things that people always argue about is whether the miracles really happened. And then we get to this one, and this one is sort of a phantasmagorical moment. It makes sense in our thinking about things if we look at the whole of the text and we know about what's going on and all that. But it is kind of hard to, if you're witnessing on the street, don't start with this, okay? If your neighbor wants to know, what is it that you believe? Don't go, well, I believe that Peter and James and John went to a mountaintop and saw Jesus in all his glory, and Moses and Elijah showed up and they got covered by a cloud and God spoke to them. And then they all disappeared. But it fits in with the way that the whole of the text reveals God and his relationship with Jesus and how he reveals the prophets and their place in the whole of the story of what ends up being the death and resurrection of Jesus, and it fits in with the way that God speaks to us now before he can speak to us face to face. It fits in. It does. I think this is as real as could possibly be. And I'm sure it really shook them up, and I'm sure when they realized that they're all alone up there, they're thinking, we need to get back down this mountain and tell everybody about this. Because we just saw something special. We just saw something special. Now what they saw was a hint. But yeah, the pictures of Jesus in Revelation, this is the important thing about the book of Revelation, is that it gives us a glimpse of Jesus as he is now. That weird description of the sword out of his mouth and all this stuff that's going on with it. Eyes that are all bright and burning and all. And we can explain all that stuff, but the point is that That's how he is now that he's freed up from his earthly binds to be revealed as he fully is. And he's not to be messed with. That's the point. You don't mess with him. And this is why they needed to see him. It was good for them to be there because Peter had just been what? Messing with Jesus. And if he didn't get enough of it by seeing him in his full glory, then God was going to tell him straight up, settle down, mister. Settle down. And the thing that he needed to listen to, and then we'll take a break. The thing that Peter needed to listen to was the fact that Jesus was telling him over and over that the Messiah must suffer at the hands of the chief priests and the scribes. And he must go to his death and rise again. Because that's going to bring what? It's going to bring new life to everybody who believes it. And you three need to start by believing me when I tell you about it. That's what was going on. So hey, let's take a break and we'll come back and we might get through this whole thing. Unless you're done with me already. I mean, I'll do whatever you want. I'll do whatever you want. Ready? Before we move on, I just want to say we should probably look at 2 Peter 1:16 to 18. Just real quickly. I don't know, Jeff, if you had thought about putting that up, but he says 1 minute. Look at what, now I'm going to be really honest with you in a scholarly way, that there is great debate about whether Peter wrote 2 Peter. Because it's written in a manner of somebody who knows Peter's story and knows what he said and that kind of thing, and then used his name, or they didn't have an author's name and they put it with Peter because it talks about Peter stuff. And I'm not going to get, it doesn't matter whether Peter wrote it, it's all true in its text. But it is very different than 1 Peter. The Greek is really different, and the way that it works, the way that it speaks, is really different. But I'm going to turn around because that's hard for me to read. But look at what this says, though. Let's just all pretend that Peter wrote this, okay? You know, it's just like, let's just buy that version of the whole thing. For we were not making up clever stories when you told about the powerful coming of our Lord Jesus Christ. We saw his majestic splendor with our own eyes when he revealed honor and glory from God the Father. And the voice from the majestic glory of God said to him, "This is my dearly loved Son who brings me great joy." We ourselves heard that voice from heaven when we were with him on the holy mountain. Now let's just say it clearly made an impression. Clearly made an impression. And it made an impression that it says in other verses, and it made it possible for us to gather in the words of the prophets and believe them, at even a stronger sense of believing the prophets. It's like this moment was so strong that he uses it as an apologetic to know that the whole story is true. We're not making up clever stories when we told you about the powerful coming of our Lord Jesus Christ. He's talking about the return of Jesus. And what is he saying? He's saying, I saw him a little bit in his majesty. I mean, look how he describes it, and yet he knows that it's just the beginning of that. He saw Jesus raised from the dead. He spoke with him. He spent time with him. He was present when the Holy Spirit fell on the early church, and he was the spokesman for the Holy Spirit on the day of Pentecost. And yet, what does he say when he wants to tell everybody that he knows he's telling us the truth? He talks about what we've just been talking about, the transfiguration. Now again, some people think that the reason that somebody else wrote this and stuck Peter's name on it to give it authority, but there's nothing in the book at all, the letter, that's anything but useful to the church and truthful. So it doesn't really, I mean, it's like we don't know who wrote Hebrews and nobody complains about that. And the title, the books, the letters, generally, Paul did sometimes, but generally they didn't put their names all over them so you knew who they were from. But anyway, this one clearly sounds like it's from Peter, and that's why the early church ascribed it to Peter. I'm certain I could find out. This is one point of great joy in my life, that the greatest text for understanding why we feel that certain books were considered canon was written by F.F. Bruce. And guess who got to study under F.F. Bruce when he went to school in England? I'm just going to say it. But it was cool to be there with him and say, well, just read my book, Tim. That's cool. Anyway, on we go. Okay, let's go back. Where are we? We're at. I just think it's important that we keep that passage in mind. Oh, can I just say that it's really clear that Mark intended for his readers to make a direct connection between the events when the law was given to Moses and this moment. It's just the way the language works and the way things work. Both of the events, this one and that one, involve great lights and clouds and all of that stuff, and voice from the clouds and the presence of Moses in both of the stories. It's really clear. that he felt it was important that we get this moment of God's revelation, not only in the first time of himself and what he feels is important for them to have a relationship with him, but then the second time when he reveals who it is that makes it possible for us to have a relationship with him. And those are connected, and I think that's really cool. Your notes will be full of that stuff, but I think we should probably move on. Let's see. Oh, one other thing. That when the cloud goes away and they suddenly see Jesus, and I mentioned this earlier, but we have to always remember that his clothes stopped being white. What they probably were dark brown, rough, dark brown color, with probably a lot of mud or something around the bottom, and he probably had hiked up his robe to hike up gird your loins. That's what that means. It means to pull your robe up and tie it off to the side so he could hike up the mountain, and his face looked like a 30-some-year-old young man, Jewish man, but that was just a shell. We'll never forget it. He was as earthy as we could possibly be, and he was otherworldly as he could possibly be, all at the same time. It's wonderful to have this moment because then we know from here on out, remember when he gets kissed by Judas, he's still that dude. He can choose to not do what he could do. When his heart is broken, he's still that person. When he's showing love to his disciples, he's still that person. We want to never forget it. Never forget it. And the fact that he says that he wants to be our brothers, I just don't get it. Why bother? Because of who he is and has been for eternity and will be for eternity. Anyway, this is a great moment. Hey, maybe I could do a sermon series in the summer when Barry's gone on the Transfiguration. There we go. That won't happen. Anyway, it goes coming down out of the mountain. They went back down the mountain. It's not a quick trip. They're having to hike their way down. I know there's a long trip up. So was it 9,000 feet? 9,000 feet. That's a long hike and elevation. And so they're going back down. Now, so we just got to picture them hiking down. Probably Jesus is in front because of the way that disciples followed their teachers. But I don't know. I mean, it's just 4 of them. They're headed back down this mountain. I'm sure that there was a bit of silence. And then it says, he told them not to tell anyone. May I just say that this is one of the poorest translations of a Greek word I have ever seen, that he did not tell them. He commanded them. He ordered them. The Greek there is like, it is charging someone with your finger in their chest kind of thing. He didn't tell them. It's diastellato. Diastellato. It's a strong, strong word. My feeling is that they were taken back a little bit by this, because I'm confident that they were thinking to themselves, I can't wait to tell the rest of them what they missed. It's like, Peter's like, okay, I get to tell Andrew. None of you get to tell Andrew, okay? If you two want to tell Judas and Thomas, that's fine. But I'm telling, it's just like, I don't know what they were thinking, but I know that what they weren't expecting was for him to tell them not to tell anyone what they had seen. And he goes, and then he says this, until the Son of Man had risen from the dead. He's right back at it. In other words, he's dropping language on them that they don't understand, okay? I just want to say that I've talked about this some, but I just want to go over it again because this is so important. First off, he calls himself what? Again, the Son of Man, which is an implication of the passage in the the prophets that tells about this person who is like the Son of Man who comes and is given all authority and power and all this stuff, and he comes with the armies of heaven. And so he's making a connection between having just been called God's Son and being the Son of Man. This is all connected. It's all this imagery that he's working with. And he says rising from the dead. And I just want to say again, every Jew had a notion of what rising from the dead was. It was a given. In fact, if I say this, I'm just going to say the rapture. You know I'm not talking about how I feel when the Colts win, right? I don't really feel rapture when the Colts win. I'm just saying. But I feel happy, but I don't feel rapture. But you know what I'm saying. We just get it. And rising from the dead was what was going to happen to every Jew who was not reprobate at the moment that God returned to the temple and called back every Jew who had ever lived from the dead. Now here's the deal. At the time that this is going on, there were tons of older Jews who were immigrating back to Jerusalem. Why? Because when they died, they wanted to be in Jerusalem because everybody thought wherever they were going to have to rise from the dead and make their way back to Jerusalem. Then some of the rabbis taught that they were going to roll underground. Did you laugh? You laughed. That's okay. That's what they taught because there's something about it that they had to stay underground because you couldn't come up into the unrarefied air of Jerusalem once God was there until you were in his presence, and so you rolled under the ground. But this is the reason, guys, this is the reason when the first church starts that there's all these issues about widows. And widows who are Greek and widows who are Jewish. You remember that stuff? Because the reason that they called out the first deacons was because they were all Greek-speaking Jews who were called to take care of the Greek-speaking Jewish widows. Why were Greek-speaking Jewish widows so many of them in Jerusalem at the time? Because they and their husbands had come back from places like Turkey and Greece and Egypt and all these places where, guess what the language was? Greek. And so they came back because they wanted to be in Jerusalem because everybody had messianic fever and they were expecting God to come back anytime, and if he didn't come back in time, they wanted to be buried right there, and their husbands died first, like happens most of the time because men had to do heavy labor in those days, and so men died, and there were tons of foreign widows. Everybody knew what they meant when they said rising from the dead, and what they heard when Jesus said the phrase rising from the dead was everybody who is a Jew at the same time rising from the dead. There's no such thing in their thinking about a person, the Son of Man, rising from the dead. And let me tell you something else. There is absolutely nothing in their thinking about the Messiah, who they've just called Jesus a little bit earlier, and they've heard God say, "This is my Son," and they've seen the glory of him. There's nothing in their thinking about the Messiah, that he suffers or that he dies. This is off the end of the chart for them. And Jesus says, you are not to tell anybody what you've seen until the Son of Man has risen from the dead. They don't have any idea what he is talking about. It's just true. It says, so they kept it to themselves. Can you imagine how that was? What happened up there? How was it? It was a nice hike. I'm glad I brought some sandwiches. You know, it's like, you know, you can see the three of them. Unfortunately, when they get to the bottom of the mountain, there's a big mess going on. And I think that's good because it took some of the pressure off of them to have to talk about what just happened. But it says they kept it to themselves. I can't imagine. I mean, I have trouble keeping. That's not true. I'm pretty much what is it that I'm as silent as the grave with important stuff. But I'm going to just tell you straight up, if I saw Jesus in his full glory and Moses and Elijah shows up, if I see him and they show up and the cloud comes over me and God talks to me, I'm probably going to tell you about it. But they kept it to themselves. But it says they often asked each other what he meant by what? Rising from the dead. He's been talking about it a whole bunch, but they don't know what he means because there's nothing in their what's the right, like their pantry of information. Why? Because they've been living under the auspices of the rabbinical teachings, the scribes who are telling them what's going to happen. And if you guys want to ever read some things like, now his name is Jesus ben Sura. And then there's all kinds of other, but Jesus ben Sura was like really an important, oh, there it is. Yes, you are destined, it is written in time to come, to put an end to wrath before the day of the Lord, to turn back the hearts of the parents toward their children and to reestablish the tribes of Israel. This is part of him saying something. And do you recognize in there where it says to turn the hearts of the parents towards their children? That's right straight out of what? It's right straight out of where it's talking about the coming of the Elijah returning, and it says, and he will what? Turn the hearts of the children to their parents and the parents to the hearts of their children. He writes this. Oh, that's Malachi. I'm sorry, that wasn't Ben Sura. I thought you'd just killed me with it. Did you have it? Oh, yeah, see, there it is again. Okay. Then I'm sending you the prophet Elijah before the great and dreadful day of the Lord arrives. His preaching will turn the hearts of the fathers to their children and the hearts of the children to their fathers. Otherwise, I will come and strike the land with a curse. The last part's a little rough, but they really got into the first part. I'm just going to tell you. But the point is, these scriptures, the Ben Sura scripture, and a lot of other writings, but this one in particular, they just spent a lot of time trying to write down what does that mean? What's it going to look like? What are they going to do? What's Elijah going to do? What's going to happen? And they built this massive, massive amount of information about what was going to happen when the Messiah came, and it was all just talking it through. And you've probably heard me say this before, but they had this big system of what was going to happen when the Messiah came, what he was going to do, where he was going to go, and how people were going to respond. And some people thought there were going to be two Messiahs because one was going to be bloodthirsty and kill Romans, but they couldn't have their sweet Messiah be a bloodthirsty killer, so they were going to have another one. And some said, no, he's going to be both and all of this. And they argued about it and talked about it, and then the schools thought of stuff, and then when they go to the synagogue, they hear people talking about it. And have you ever been to a church where they're going to tell you what's going to happen when Jesus comes back? You ever seen those big charts that they put up and they tell you that this is going to happen and the politics are here and that? You know what I'm talking about? This is exactly what was happening, and they got every single thing wrong but where he was going to be born. And the only reason they got that right was because the wise men needed to know when they came to see Jesus. Everything else they were wrong about. And this is a world that these disciples have been living in all their lives. They've been hearing it all their lives, and then they are suddenly confronted with the true Messiah, and nothing is working out. And they got to figure out what he means by the Son of Man rising from the dead. It's no wonder they were upset about this. I can see them, like Peter and John are off to the side. What have you been thinking? What do you think that means? Or John and his brother James they're talking about it, or the three of them get together and they go, nobody's listening, are they? I bet they did, because it was so overwhelming, and yet they had no idea what was coming. None. And we're going to stop here. This is a great place to stop. Because the next thing that happens is that they don't ask him about what you mean by rising from the dead, because they've just seen whom? Elijah. And we just read a passage that said Elijah was going to come back before the Messiah. And so they're very confused, because they'd been taught that Elijah was going to come back and he was going to make sure that all the land was redistributed to families the way that it had been originally done by Joshua back when they moved into the Promised Land. And that he was going to make sure that everybody followed the law. He was going to set up a legal system so that everybody had to follow the law appropriately. We can go on and on about all the stuff Elijah was going to do when he came back. Now, where they got all that, I do not know. But they got it all from the parents, fathers turning their hearts to the parents, and the parents turning their hearts to the parents, turning their hearts to the children, and the children. You know what I'm talking about. They got it all from there. But they were just making it up. That's why I don't get worried when I see those guys with the big charts and they tell me that the Russians are going to come down here and the Chinese are going to come here, and we expect this to happen, and so I'm thinking, you know what? They may be getting one thing right, and it's because something's going to happen in the future where some wise men are going to need to know about it. But in the meantime, God's going to do exactly what he wants to do, and we'll probably be on the backside of it when it comes around. He'll go, couldn't you see it? And we'll go, no, because nobody was really listening. Nobody was listening, and nobody was really obeying. So that's what was happening. Does this make sense? All with me? Okay. Next week we'll finish this hunk, and we'll see how far we get. Thank you, thank you, thank you. I'll see you next week.